And what I've come to realize is so few people have an understanding of who we are as a civilization and where we came from. And so they are, when they're caught up in the system, they are totally at a loss as to how to deal with their problem. So I have spent so much of my time studying where we came from, and I want to just read briefly from this book, The Mapping History, World History. And it says, the birth of civilization is always said to have coincided with the advent of mankind on the earth. The rise of Homo sapiens occurred about 130 to 200,000 years ago. According to recent research, Austrian Aborigine genes still exist in Tierra del Fuego, and it is speculated that Japanese could have reached America via the Japanese currents or via Hawaii. So here's I've got a map of the world here. This is the world. This is where we are over here in America, where civilization started. That is where people settled on the mouths of these rivers. The Nile River in Egypt here, the confluence of the Tigris and Euphrates, that's where Sumer, the civilization of Sumer began, where there was all these little city-states in Sumer, where they started fighting over with each other, one state against another. This starts about 4000 BC. And then Crete, which is an island here between Egypt and Greece, was about 4000 BC civilization developed there, commercial civilization. Now it was an island, and one of the reasons why they developed an island, because wherever else wealth would be produced, as soon as there was a community and wealth, there were predators always in the wings waiting to come in, the barbarians, and overrunning and destroying the civilization and putting it back to zero. And then another, usually a trading mission would set up, and a new culture would be evolved from the ruins of the old culture. Now this repeated itself over and over again. The ancient, as I said, the Cretans here, the Egyptians, and then in Sumer. In Sumer, one of the colonies was Babylon. And so when Babylon became all-powerful, then it went back, and you've heard in history they talk about the child going back to strangle the parent. And this is what happens so often when the colonies are created, and then the colony itself becomes strong militarily, and it goes back and it conquers the parent, and you create all of these continuous empires that come out of that. And so out of these different empires, you have the three main areas were the Tigris and the Euphrates at the head of the Persian Gulf, the Nile in Egypt, the Indus River in India. Though about 4000 BC, there were advanced cultures in all of those areas. Now that, we don't have any recorded history of that. It's carbon dating and whatever remains were there. The recorded history of man started with Herodotus, who was a contemporary of Socrates, and they lived in Greece here. If you can see it right here, that it became a commercial center. When backing up before Greece, when Crete was here, a civilization of Mycenae developed, and this was about 1500 2000 to 1500 BC, and became quite advanced, but because of its wealth that it produced, it started drawing in down on it the Ionians and Dorians and other tribal cultures here in the wings, and they came in and overran those areas, and then they in turn took over and continued the commercial expansion. And that commercial expansion of Greece, there was the first Dark Ages, about 1200 BC. Now, we don't have any written account of this, but this is what passes down about 1200 BC. These waves of Dorians and these others started down into the Mycenaean area, and they ultimately took it over and turned them into these constant warring factions. That's one of the legacies of our commercial heritage, is that there's been a series of just constant warfare between these different commercial entities. In Greece, they had all these city-states that developed, and they developed around the Aegean, and in North Africa and in Asia Minor, Troy and Halicarnassus in this area here. So these commercial cultures were constantly competing and improving their way of life, and they continued to expand until recorded history starts with Herodotus, and basically he writes about some of these early wars. In fact, he compliments Socrates, because Socrates on one of these warring parties bore all of his hardship with pleasure and was so unique. Socrates never wrote anything himself, but because of his questioning and knowledge, he was given great credence by the Greek culture, which we are all a part of. And this Greek culture, ultimately, they started, the Athens got into it with one of the islands on Sicily, Palermo, and they started the Peloponnesian War. And these wars continued. There were several of them, but ultimately Athens was completely destroyed in their constant war. Thucydides, another historian at the time, said that he was going to write the history of the Peloponnesian War, so that because of the insanity and the folly of men that live in cultured existence, going out and slaughtering, killing each other, and by doing that weakened themselves internally, and by doing that they set themselves up to be overrun ultimately, first by Philip of Macedonia, and then by his son Alexander. And Alexander then conquered not only Greece, but he conquered all of the Mediterranean and much over into almost to India, and where his troops finally forced him to turn around and go back. And so if you can see this map here, if that is visible, this is the rise of Macedonia. Here is Macedonia, where Pila is the capital, about 4th century BC, and all these cities. Here's Sparta down here, here's Corinth, Thebes, Athens, in this area, and all these different colors are different tribal cultures. And you see these different color-coded here. So these the Spartans, the Dorians, and these other groups had their own islands, and all of these islands in the Aegean were where the commerce was everything. It was the continuous fight of these different city-states over the commerce that was going back and forth between them. So that continued until Alexander, and then when Alexander conquered this whole basin here. And if you can see this, here's Macedonia up here. Here's Anatolia, Turkey now. This is Greece. This is North Africa. This is Egypt. This is Palestine. This is all through Persia, and then over into India. That was what Alexander conquered. And then at his death, these areas all were broken up, and they became the separate satrapies of his generals. And one of them, Ptolemy, was sent to Egypt, and Egypt, the last, Cleopatra was the last of the Ptolemies before the Romans then conquered that whole area, and the Roman Empire then took over all of Europe. But before the Romans took over, the other great power that had such an impact on Rome was Carthage. And Carthage was a North African city-state, very prosperous. It had been founded by by Tyre or one of the others. It was a Semitic capital, but the Punic Wars, Rome and Carthage were fighting over Sicily. And so it was called the Punic Wars that developed. And in 100-year time, ultimately Rome conquered Carthage. And not only did they conquer them, but they went in and they leveled the city. It was the size of Portland, about 700,000 people. They leveled it and sold all of the inhabitants into slavery. This was about 200 BC. And then Rome became preeminent up until, it's still in existence. The Roman Catholicism started about 500 BC, about 800 years before it adopted Christianity. But the saying of history is that all ancient civilizations fell into Rome. They assimilated all that was out there before. And all modern civilizations from that time, including the present, are the Greco-Roman base. Ours is, Europe, all of them are. And what does that mean? Well, they have a very disciplined administrative government control. If you went back to Rome 2,000 years ago in the time of Caesar, I said you went to the rich villas where the wealthy lived, there would be virtually no difference between how they lived then and how the rich and wealthy live today. They didn't have television and the electrical world, but the ease and the luxury and the lifestyles were very much alike. They had servants and slaves that took care of all the menial tasks. They had great stores, great wealth, education, learning, all of this, very, very advanced cultures in the time of Rome. Now, those ultimately, how do we do for time? Those ultimately, Rome fell because it fell because, as the one historian says, it ran out of men to defend it. And it fell about 350 Western Roman Empire to the Franks in about 350 to 450 AD. And that's the introduction.